While those investigations continue, Dr. Efua Prah is a lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology at the University of Stellenbosh. She joins us now. Dr. Prah, good evening, and thank you very much indeed for your time. I really do appreciate it on the Pulse with us tonight. We've been talking, and the phrases that people have used during this investigation by the Human Rights Commission into the advertising industry is around adverts that are, quote, tone deaf. Do we need to maybe talk about what we're actually talking about, which is adverts that have caused offence, that may actually be racist? Does it help to be very clear what we're talking about?
Yes, Stephen, I think that when we mince our words and we sort of try and walk on eggshells talking about very important social and political and economic subjects, it's best to just be direct. So if we're talking, let's call a spade a spade. This advert is towing a racist narrative, then let's call it that. Let's call it a racist narrative rather than saying it's tone deaf, or perhaps in a different context we could have designed it this way, or we didn't realize it at the time of making. Well, I mean, I think that those things are given excuses, but I think at the onset it might be a useful tool to just name it correctly, better than hedging around the actual meat of what needs to be discussed.
I mean, if we don't define it correctly, we're unlikely to diagnose the cause of it correctly and unlikely to find the proper cure.
Right, to take a very medical lens to it. I think, yeah, it's a useful way of using that metaphor, that once we are able to diagnose the problem, then we can also probably protract a prognosis over how we can then determine what to do next. Once we name it, then we'll be able to understand how what follows on would make sense. Yeah.
One of the things that adverts do is to use stereotypes. So let me give an example that's not around race, just because it may help me make the point, which is that adverts, often television adverts, will use the stereotype of the stupid father or the stupid middle-aged man. It'll be about how he dresses. It'll be about how he acts. It's the use of, and they use these stereotypes because they help them sell products. They create the little motif or the little story or the little narrative that they're trying to get to. And it's the use of stereotypes that might lead to offensive adverts. So if you see what I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it's a function of using stereotypes that leads automatically to offensive adverts, and then automatically some of those might be racist.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, I think the function of stereotypes is we use it maybe as a vehicle to easily convey meanings. And so if we take it at that level, we're using it as a vehicle to convey an agreed upon meaning, it then becomes quite problematic when you're using a racist stereotype or a stereotype that's fueled by racist ideologies to suggest a wider meaning. And also if as a society you're buying into that stereotype, it means also that you are yourself generating or promulgating a race-based discriminatory driven practice. So I think, there is one thing about using stereotypes to suggest wider meanings, but it really is problematic when that stereotype is based on an unfound racial projection or discrimination.
I mean, we see these stereotypes with gender often, for example. If there's an advert for a washing powder, I don't know if I've ever seen one that's got a man. It's always a woman presumed to be a mother. If you have the family around a breakfast table eating breakfast cereal, it's a nuclear family. It's a man and a woman. It's not a same-sex family. This then goes into race as well. It's about what the advertising agency sees as normal, and that's where the assumptions become hugely problematic.
Yes, yeah, agreed, absolutely. I think it's also these taken for granted normative standards that we use as the status quo, and I think that's also part of the problem is when a stereotype becomes the vehicle to punt normative behavior scripts. So then the usual and the normal place for a woman is being the director of the washing or the food at dinner, or indeed the racist underpinnings of different adverts, and also this question of hair and the politics of hair it's not something that's new within the South African terrain. They've been I think there was earlier than 2020 was in 2016 there was the black girls who were in protest about the Pretoria high school girls, particularly the mouthpiece then became Zuleika Patel had used that platform to articulate a very necessary attendance at some of our problems that young black people are facing, and it's the stereotypes that really need to be unpacked. Why is it that they have such a sustaining power to dictate people's choices, and also the responsibility, I think, of the advertising agency as a marketing industry. You have to be very calculated about the stories that you are disseminating and that you're mediating. You have a responsibility, really, as a broadcaster, to make sure that you're not towing a destructive normative line.
The other issue, and this is an old view, but I think it's still very current, is that we keep seeing adverts like this because of a lack of diversity in the room that comes up with the advert, in the advertising agency that actually draws up the advert, that comes up with the idea. It seems to me that there must be a lack of diversity there, which is what leads to this repeated problem.
Yes. Well, I'm unsure really. I don't know. I mean, I don't have a handle on who's sitting around the boardroom table when these decisions are made. I'm just also a consumer in all of these kinds of discourses. But I assume, I don't know. I mean, I think it's too much of a leap without the actual data and without the evidence. It's too much of a leap to say that diversity might not be happening in that boardroom. But certainly, I think if we take it to the level, rather than looking at the bodies and who's sitting there, if we take it to the level of I guess a replication of ideas, outdated maybe patriarchal ideas or outdated racist ideas. You can also buy into racist ideologues and be a black person. Of course, Fanon has this work of inferiority complexes. It's not, it doesn't necessarily mean because you have a black person sitting at that boardroom that they are not going to replicate dangerous narratives. It's also, when we think about power, is there enough power in that room to speak against problematic knowledge systems? Who is speaking against the creation of the other, which is also what happened in the advertising industry. That the advertisement around hair is that the normative standard is the thing that's really at the center of the problem, is that we've centered, sort of fair, straight hair as the normative standard, and anything that deviates out of that becomes abnormal. It becomes a politics of otherness, which I think is part of the problem, is how do we then center a multiplicity of normative readings, which I guess also would collapse the definition of what normative is if you have a plethora of different ideas. But I think that's what we should be chasing, is this, I guess in the social sciences we call it, a politics of alterity, the politics of otherness. How do we make sure that a variety of voices are heard in concert to, the stereotypes that you mentioned earlier?
Sure.
How do we start unpacking and dismantling those problematic stereotypes?
Dr. Efua Prah, thank you, lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology at the University of Stellenbosh. Really do appreciate the time.